Welcome to Far Out with Faust. I'm Faust Chicho. I'm your host, in case you didn't know. Today, I'm sitting here with two incredible individuals, Bill Softky and Mike Dannheim. I'm going to let them introduce themselves because their credentials are thick. So, Mike, why don't you go first?
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate not going for Bill. Credentials are even thicker than mine, so way thicker. So great to lead. Great to be here, Faust. Mike Dannheim, the founder at joinsensi.com. My background, I've been building technology startups for about 12 years now. We're part of two venture-backed startups, one with Rocket Internet and then one with Y Combinator-backed startup. And I've been a meditation and yoga practitioner for about 17 years now. And I recovered from a traumatic brain injury through the power of simple mindfulness meditation. And now I'm combining sort of my two passions, technology and mindfulness and neuroscience, to help bring tools into the world to help people help identify sources of stress and learn how to self-heal and self-regulate and explore how great this life can be, you know, when we're
Absolutely.
Ourselves and to others.
That's an incredible transformation where you were and where you are now and what you're doing. We're gonna get into all that, Mike. Bill, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
My three main threads are also the same, which is technology, mindfulness, and whatever the third one was. But I came from the opposite end. I grew up as sort of an alpha nerd in the land of nerds. In Silicon Valley, my parents were nuclear physicists. I tinkered with TV jammers from 8th grade on. My kid brother and I hacked the announcement system. So I wound up going the long way into, so I was a meditator. I was doing TM and stuff, but I was still very much in my head because that's the only place I ever lived. But I got good at it. Wound up going to very fancy grad school. I taught in the Peace Corps. That was fun. I taught physics in West Africa, but then went to a fancy grad school, studied neuroscience, physics, brain theory, things like that, and ultimately got sick of neuroscience after discovering a giant mistake that they'd been sweeping under the rug for 30 years. Turns out neuroscience is not really interested in mathematical coherence, which is a problem. They're putting data ahead of common sense. And so I got sick of neuroscience, left it, joined Silicon Valley, and was kind of like the first data scientist and the first algorithm jock, because I was badgering CEOs, telling them that they needed to hire somebody to invent algorithms. And the CEOs 20 years ago were all saying, algorithms? Our computer scientists studied those in their undergrad years. It's like, yeah, right. Because all the algorithms had already been written at that point, and they were all in the back of the book, like QSort. So I had a sort of a half a life in neuroscience and brain theory and stuff, overlapped with some cool people like Jeff Hawkins and Christoph Koch and so forth. And then an equally cool path through data science, figuring out, say, how to design an algorithm which will bid against Google on their AdWords auction. Bidding with Google is easy. They help you with that because they take your money.
Right.
But if you're the person whose money is being taken, your job is a little bit harder. So the mixture of understanding data flow as being pretty much the buck stops here nerd. You know, I was the guy so nerdy they kept me away from the programmers.
Wow.
Wow,
that's nerdy.
And I was also the guy who got the the read-only root password to the corporate database, which had 200 million a year going through it, and I got to tell the executives what's true and what's false. Wow. So I pretty much had to use math because it was the only thing. I wasn't rich enough to be able to browbeat anyone. So I had that math, and then earlier I understood what brains had to do and what tools I had to do it with. And it turns out once you understand both how information flows and also how brains and bodies are put together, it's possible the two can overlap, and it turns out they overlap in the simplest, most obvious way that every hippie would recognize and every neuroscientist would tear their hair out.
I have a little idea of what you're talking about, just with my limited knowledge and exposure into this field. But yeah, I can't wait to get into that. So the question is where to start with you two. So first of all, you guys know each other, just for, for context in the audience who playing along at home. You guys work together on Pretty exciting project that Mike referenced it later in his intro, I think. That's how you guys, is that how you guys met, or did you know each other before that?
We met as sort of like a crossroads of two interesting, he's working on a really interesting project. I was working on a really interesting project. And then Bill's background is basically, he has all these papers that basically really validate what the core premise of what we're doing.
Oh, I see.
And bring a depth to what we're doing. And so a mutual friend of ours that is also involved in the other project Bill works on was like, he heard about my project and was like, oh my God, you and Bill have to connect. And our first conversation, we hit it off. And I don't know,
Nice.
like a year and a half ago, I think that was about now, roughly.
Yeah, it's like a year or something. It was Roy, right?
Yeah,
Roy started off.
Roy Comier, yeah.
Very cool. Mike, why don't we talk a little bit about that project that you guys are working on and what it does, since it's a common thread we can begin with.
What Sensi is the easiest way to identify where you're stuck, how stuck you are, and then be able to clear stuck rapidly. And what we do is
it's an app, though, right? It's
an app, but what we've done is we've rethought how to use the smartphone. So inside the smartphone, there's sensors, there's gyroscope and accelerometer.
Mm-hmm.
And we use the sensors inside the smartphone to track a specific gesture where we measure the fluidity of movement. And in that, we can measure the nervous system in response to thought and spoken word, and measure how basically if a person's in a flow or if they're in a block state, and help them identify where the blockages are, and then provide clearing modalities to help them rapidly expand their consciousness.
Well, it's so clear to me now why Hunter was drawn to you. No, that's incredible. So, but how accurate is it? How does it do what it does?
Yeah. So there's levels to the accuracy. Our initial research was on deceit. So we did true false statements. Oxford University points to deceit as a gold standard for stress. It's the verity of the word spoken that's the gold standard. So we did statements like, my name is Mike. My name is Kate. I'm alive. I'm dead. And the gesture is this. Sorry, it's a 1, 2, 3. So they make the statement, they do the gesture. The key is feeling what they're saying. So we prompt them to think and feel and do the gesture. And about 5 years ago, our initial accuracy was about 69% at detecting true versus false statements. We had much stronger accuracy for detecting true statements versus false. And then over time, we've been able to increase that accuracy up to about 79%. And then in the wild usage, we're getting, because people give feedback every time they check in and we give them, blocked or flow. They tell us if they agree or disagree. Mm-hmm. We have some people in the 90 percentile for our detection. So it's super accurate. The challenge with accuracy with this is it's sort of two-way, right? There's the accuracy of Sensi, and then there's also the accuracy of the individual's perception.
Right.
And that in itself is, we can go deep on both of those. So
right. Very cool. Bill, how did you get in? So when you came on and met, how did you advance this the project of his?
Well, once I met Mike and heard that he was working on a smartphone project, I actually had no idea what it was. But once he said accelerometer, I'm pretty sure that's the moment my brain clicked into nerd mode. And I can imagine 6 axes of little micro MEMS things feeding 250 samples a second into something which I could program. And I'm imagining, what could you do with all that data? Now, I'm approaching it from exactly the opposite end of Mike. Mike just talked about an app which meets users where they are. They have to feel the statement, they make a statement, they decide to do the gesture, they know they're doing the gesture, the app Sensi tells them something about them that they didn't know before. So that is the first step toward what users can approach and what they can feel. And I'm coming from sort of the South Pole of Antarctica. What could you use to tell people something they couldn't possibly feel? Where is the real bandwidth? Because the key insight about brains is that all the most important stuff is hidden from us on purpose. Brains have to erase their own mistakes frantically. Otherwise, we'd be so clouded with pixelation errors we couldn't walk across the room. So our brain's job is to smooth out stuff and make it unconscious, and that smartphone can measure. So my hope for the smartphone, in addition to doing the things that Mike has already been clinically testing and so forth, which is just a straight ahead how to make a medical intervention thing, I want to also jump ahead and take every bit of data in there and make some cool little vibrating data cloud that it looks like it's in some science fiction movie, but where the algorithm can essentially understand the subtleties of your own body tremor in a way which can help you learn to control it. So think of the goal of yoga is to essentially control the fluttering of your own nervous system and to calm it down. And I think that is the goal of a brain, is to essentially do vibration management. And the more you can use smartphone accelerometers to give you real-time useful biofeedback about body control, the kind of thing that, a dance instructor might see in you even if you can't see it yourself, that's the sort of thing that the right kind of technology can help us with. It can give us biofeedback which is perfectly tuned to help us transform our nervous systems in the way that we want.
Man, you guys are like, you're going to be like my two new heroes. I mean, this is like exactly what, as a society, we need desperately at this point in time, with smartphones being, literally attached to, I don't know, you've probably seen some young people walking around these days and they're not exactly watching where they're going, but they are glued to their little devices, right?
Well, as a jump in though, just as a fair warning, what got me onto this jag was about 8 or 10 years ago when my wife and I understood enough about the nervous system that we realized how bad digital stuff is for them. So my primary efforts over the last few years have been sounding the alarm about what amounts to a kind of a mathematical toxicity of digital information in continuous nervous systems. So when you're talking about kids walking with smartphones glued to them, I am farther into that battle than you could possibly know.
Wow, that doesn't surprise me to hear, but also I think it's incredible that I that I kind of intuited that, because you both have a dog in that race. Even if you had only just worked on this project together, you would already be kind of part of that. I hate to put things in battle terms, but we have a habit of doing that, us human beings. But you're kind of you're part of the cavalry, which is awesome, I think, because one of the reasons why Hunter and I created this channel was to kind of throw some counter programming into the programming, because they're getting the programming from everywhere anyway, and we see how powerful the programming is and how people can be programmed, because that's kind of the way we walk around in this human technology. It's part of the deal. We get programmed one way or the other. And so we were inspired to create this channel, and kind of start throwing in some different software for people to look at the world with. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Your image of programming, the very first fan we got several years ago was a guy named Doug Rushkoff, who's written a whole bunch of books like Throwing Rocks at the Google Bus. But the one which caught our attention was titled Program or Be Programmed. And he was the first person I'd read who really understood essentially how programmable the nervous system is. And that was without even understanding the biophysics of how it works. But,
Wow. Yeah. It's a remarkable way to, and what's crazy is even young people, even like my 10-year-old is learning coding in one of his schools. Like they can understand how that works, even at that young age. So, mm-hmm. You probably could too. You guys are like both probably a lot smarter than I was.
Smarter isn't a good word for understanding things, because the ability to program is so different from the ability to connect with somebody.
Yeah.
Which is what we're meant to do.
Very true. Very true. So Mike, dude, so you had, I know someone who had a terrible time after they suffered a TBI. It led to an eventual divorce, and he was very happily married. It led to a lot of domestic problems with his spouse, and then there was this custody battle, and her claiming that he was not fit to take care of his children, who he adored. TBI is I don't think people realize how crazy that can be to deal with, and what it can do to it can really destroy someone's life. So you had a brain injury where you almost died. Am I right?
It was it was a bad brain injury. I can't comment on if I almost died or not, because when I share the experience, a lot of people think it's a near-death experience, and it might have been, but I don't. I never flatlined.
Okay. Yeah, but you had kind of have an out-of-body experience.
Yeah. It was a large car accident, and I smashed my head on the window, and I was unconscious. And my friend pulled me out of the car, and when he pulled me out of the car, the body was able to stand, and then I was out of the body, and my vantage point was from the back of the head. So I was like out back here, and I was watching the body walk around the scene of the accident. And then it was a really strange experience. The paramedics and the police officer on the scene of the accident, when they would talk to me, I would toggle back in, and I could see their mouths moving, but I couldn't hear what they were saying. And when they would stop talking, I would toggle back out, and the vantage point would be there, and I was watching the body walk around the scene of the accident, but I wasn't in the body. And I was also at the time, I didn't have the words for it, but what I've come to learn was I was in a samadhi state, because I was in this just pure state of like loving awareness. I've never felt more loved in my life. And it was incongruent with what I was observing, because it was a big car accident. There was like a bunch of cars involved. Yeah, and then, to your point, I'm sorry to hear about your friend, but to the point, when I came back into the body, I didn't fully integrate. So there was a part of me that was in the body and a part of me that was still out. And I was struggling after the accident. I had amnesia, so I didn't know who I was for about a day. And then for about 6 months after, probably about 8 months after, actually, I was struggling really badly with short-term memory recall. So you'd speak to me, and the version of me in the body would kind of stare at you and be like, and I had no idea how to respond. And there was another version of me that was aware of it and was like totally ashamed. And so I was just like decimated. I was, depressed, anxious, suicidal, like the whole thing. It was really dark. I was like 20 years old at the time. And the Western medical system, we did the CAT scans, the MRI, all that stuff. And they basically said that, I suffered a really bad TBI, and that I was probably gonna have to deal with this for the rest of my life, and which made me feel more hopeless, And then I met a hippie guy who taught me how to meditate. And
thank God for hippies, man.
Yes, literally. Literally, thank God for hippies. Martin was an amazing guy. He taught me how to meditate, and 6 months after meditating, my life took off.
Amazing, dude.
Yeah.
I'm a student of Dr. Joe Dispenza's. If you're into the neuroscience, I'm sure you've heard of him. And I've seen some remarkable recoveries using meditation, and people, like everything from stage 4 cancer to stroke victims, paralysis, ALS. I saw a woman this woman was diagnosed with the Stephen Hawking ALS. And when she started coming to the workshops, they were wheeling her in. She had lost the ability to talk. She had lost the ability to walk. When I met her, she was walking. Well, the first day of the retreat, she was still walking with a walker. And on the 6th day, she walked to the stage without it, and she danced to Montel Jordan's "This Is How We Do It" with Dr. Joe before she gave her testimony. And it was incredible.
That's amazing.
Man, I'll never, ever forget her talking. Her speech was it was slightly labored, but she could talk, man. And she was just the twinkle in her eye. You know what I'm saying? Like this woman knew the secret. She absolutely knew the secret, and she was just so happy to be alive. It was incredible meeting her.
That's beautiful. And that's it, that experience that you witnessed, that's what we're working to, I believe all of us are working to bring into the world, is this realization that there's ability to self-heal that's in you,
Mm-hmm. I would say the most important thing here isn't even the technology or the meditation techniques or whatever it is that makes it. It's to make sure we keep the stories alive and keep the people alive who are like that. In technology, the idea is a reference implementation. Once you've built one version of a circuit like an atomic clock or something, now you can use that to tune all the other ones, and now you've got some wonderful timepiece or instrument. Humans are the most elaborate instruments in the world. The human body and nervous system is designed to do exactly that kind of thing. Our ancestors kept each other alive without drugs or surgery for a couple million years. The system is designed to work just fine, but we've lost the examples of it. If all we see is a bunch of screwed up screen addicts who are hunched over and miserable, we'll start to think humanity is born to be screwed up and miserable. So it's incredibly important that we have stories like that, we hear them, and we find a way to see these people. I know some people like that myself. It's not so much they recovered from disease, but they're just such graceful hyper athletes that I just want to watch them move. but it is an example of what a human being can be, and we need to keep it.
Man, you just touched on something that I think is so important and profound, and that I really learned speaking to people on this podcast, just about how, we're creating our reality, and most humans don't realize, as they look out into the world and they see this mess, they don't realize that that's what they're overlaying on what comes next. And so the creations, powers that we have are manifesting as they always will, except, we're looking at some of this disaster that's happening and thinking, oh, that's what's to come. And it just, we have to realize what we are, I think. And I mean, that was just like a thought that I had when you said that, because you really kind of pegged it, Bill, with what you said. We need more stories of what we are, of what we're capable of, and what we are is nothing short of divine and inspirational. So
the particular reason, sorry to step all over.
No, you're good.
On such a cool thread. I love talking. That's my weakness. But the thing that you're leaning toward sort of faith and hope, is actually a mathematical concept which is at the center of how one can make sense of reality. So just for half a minute, to reel it back to when I was writing that program which made money against Google AdWords, that was all about, we had to make 500,000 bids and we only had 20,000 clicks. So we have to basically give out 20 data points for every one data point we get in, and that's the wrong ratio. Usually you run the other way. So we're doing a lot of making stuff up, a lot of filling in, but that filling in is called faith. In religious terms, it's called Bayesian priors in mathematical terms. But it means that unless you know the shape of your answer in advance, you've no business dealing with data. Evidence always comes second. So if you just look around at an evidence-based world and you say, wow, people are fat. Well, yeah, you hang around 20th century America, people are fat, but that's not a description of Homo sapiens as a species. It's a description of the evidence you happen to be looking at, and you may not know why it's true. So the most important thing is not just to have pictures and images and stories of people who have really excelled in ways we know we're capable of, but to remember that in some sense, the evidence we are presented with from a screwed up world is not reflective of the pristine purity of what a nervous system is at its best.
Yeah, so well said. I want to read something that Bill wrote that I love, that he has right on his website, which we'll have included a link in the description of this video. But I love this. I included it because I want to read it. He wrote, "Our ancestors evolved as upright mammals in a complex world, and whatever happiness circuitry they used to find their way in life still lies latent in us now. But much of that circuitry has been cloaked or redirected toward the goals of a civilized society, and its function has been forgotten. This site, Bill's site, aims to clarify the common sense principles by which our own minds operate, so that individuals may rediscover their own humanity inside themselves." And then he says, "In a world of 10 billion people, for whom fulfillment is but an eye blink away, is unstable in a good way, presenting an opportunity for sudden radical improvement. In a pot of still molten sugar, adding a single grain can crystallize it all at once. In the same fashion, inside a confused brain or society, a single shift of viewpoint or a reference frame can suddenly recrystallize both perception and performance. The separate theoretical viewpoints assembled here are well established, and in hindsight, most seem obvious." He's talking about his site, which you'll have to visit. "That clarity may help this approach spread like wildfire, as useful scientific ideas often spread. But unlike other scientific truths, an understanding of the circuitry which lies inside our minds needs neither external validation, besides experiments on oneself, nor resources, besides those hours spent, nor institutional support. It can only be consumed and spread by individuals for private ends." And I just think that speaks volumes, that that's like, that's on your site. And it's so true, man. It's like, God, there's so many truths in what you
Thank you.
said.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I still stand behind that. That is pretty much my perspective on things. And I think it's a lot of perspectives. The magic about this understanding is that people find it so familiar. So many people from Socrates and Plato onward have said so much of this that it's almost impossible to listen to it without jumping in and saying, oh, so-and-so said it, so-and-so that, you can't actually get to the end of it because so much of it is already known.
Yeah. Yeah. And, Michael, what I wanted to ask you was this Martin, this guy that you met, what kind of meditation techniques did he begin to teach you?
Oh, really simple. Just a mindfulness meditation where I just observed the breath at the base of the nose and he started me off really simple where it was 1 minute a day for a week. And then the second week I went to 2 minutes, and the third week I went to 3 minutes. So I was getting like little wins, up to 20 minutes. How
long did that go on until you really started to experience a kind of a different reality?
Well, I mean, the act itself it's similar to what you guys were just talking about with Bill, right? Because the act itself of just beginning the practice started to shift my reality,
right? And
shifting the experience of, oh, I'm not my thoughts, and that sounded so woo-woo until I got into the action of it, right? And then experiencing that I can sort of, what Martin would do is when he would coach me through when thoughts would occur. Imagine you have like a little hook, and you can just like hook them away like they're little clouds, or observe them through to completion, and watching them dissolve just by the observation, shifting the point of the experiencer and who I thought I was, from basically being imprisoned to these terrible thoughts that were looping around this terrible state that I was in, to being able to be present where everything was kind of okay.
So Mike,
happened within like a month.
So about a month of practice, you really started to. That's incredible. I mean, that's not a long time to practice something, for it to change your life. I just think it's amazing. I think, I'm advertising meditation. I know there's no money in it, but I'm always trying to push it on people.
I think to your point, I think our society depends upon it. I think that our survival as a species depends upon us all getting into it, because, like Bill's paper and what you just read, I teach mindfulness and entrepreneurship in the prison system to youthful offenders. Youthful offenders, by the way, that's a whole nother conversation for another day. That label in itself is weird. That's not my label. But these guys are like 16 to like 21, 22. And, a lot of them have never experienced or accessed anything like this. And you'll see rapid transformation. You go in, you sit down, you have them do a couple breathing exercises, a couple reframing exercises, and they start unlocking their lives. And then we have them build a business, and like just rapid transformation.
Dude, that's so cool.
It's amazing. It's the most impactful thing I've done in my life personally, is going in and seeing that. And it's, I'm doing it because it was done to me. Martin showed up. I didn't know him. He shared access. That's what we do, right? We pass it on.
We do. Yeah.
There's so many things about your meditation experience I want to ask about. So I guess the first one is, did you feel any changes in, call it, your sensory motor system? So you've been talking about thoughts and self-images, which are kind of abstract, but just in terms of where you felt the oxygen or your balance or your butt bones or some other boring physiological thing?
Yeah, I'm trying to. So it's a big question, because my personal journey, and like, it was interesting, Bill, because initially in meditation, I didn't immediately. It wasn't until I started to get more into yoga that I sort of had more of the embodiment. And my personal journey, I'm like highly empathic, and at a young age, I kind of cut off from that. I wasn't raised in a family where I was told about my feelings. I was kind of told to like suck it up and shut my feelings off. And so it wasn't until I met my wife and then got into yoga that I really started to accept and expand into my body. And then with the breath and the yogic practice, that really enhanced the sensory motor. So to answer the question, initially it felt more like a disembodied state of awareness.
So meditation was like a hook toward re-embodiment.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Perfect. That's how it's supposed to work.
Yeah.
Very cool. So it's fascinating to me that you met this guy and he changed your life like that. It's incredible. I mean, you really do change the world by changing yourself, one way or the other. You know, there's so much truth in that.
The thing I've got a close friend of mine has been for a long time teaching chess to kids in prison. So the same kind of thing you're doing, but you know, chess rather than entrepreneurship. And he, being a chess master, is really good at it and inspires a lot of people. But but both of those so far are kind of solo pursuits. And what I think would be the most wonderful thing, I don't know how to teach it. I haven't been in prison. I'm going to probably try to avoid being in prison unless I go there on purpose. But it would be wonderful to be able to teach people to connect to each other. Because that is the most essential paleo function built into all of us. We're the most intensely social species on the planet. And yet we're in a place where everybody's on their own little phone and they can't even look at each other without left swiping or right swiping first, you know? So how do you teach people to connect?
Yeah.
I love it. Sorry, go on, Faust.
No,
Sorry.
you answer. You're more equipped to answer than me.
Well, Bill's inspired this conversation, so I love that he's asking this question. He's inspired this for us and with our technology, and I love that he's leading with a question because he has amazing ideas about it too. But we started to apply our technology in this direction, and I'm really inspired by it. And I want to ask a question too, which is like, when we have technology that can measure authentic connection to self and then can measure authentic connection in relationship, what kind of problems can that solve, and what kind of delights can that bring forward, you know, and what kind of newness can that bring into the world that can make life even better? Just to add on to the question. Like, what are the implications when I can measure direct connection in this call and know if I'm being heard, and vice versa if I'm hearing?
Well, I'll tell you the most provocative one I can think of, the most world-changing. So imagine you get this little meter and it starts glowing red when you guys are connected, and because your eyes are locked on each other and your fingertips are touching, you know it's true, right? So the green light is actually a real thing. That just means the damn portal is open. You know, the giant wormhole that the galactic spaceship is about to open. The wormhole is open when the green light is on. What are you going to put through it? Now, the trick is you don't get to do anything conscious. The minute you start doing words and symbols and auditing stuff and keeping track of, and did you say that and what I meant, that's all gone. Green light's off. But as long as the green light's on and the portal is open, people can invent telepathy games. There will be a way of somehow, kind of like a Ouija board, first 2 people and then 3 and then 5, will find some way of creating something together which none of them were consciously aware of creating. But because the unconscious portal is open so wide, it works anyway. And that is going to be the funnest, weirdest thing. And it's going to be kids who invent it because they haven't learned how not to.
Yeah, they haven't had that ability kind of. Well, I think it remains dormant long enough in some people. And I also talked to an amazing, he's a psychophysicist is what he's describing. He was Russian. He was kind of, he didn't let me talk about this in a podcast, but the KGB kind of made him work for them. And he was in some of their programs there, and they were doing some really crazy, fun, exciting, hush hush stuff, but he was telling me how they developed technology. You guys got to check that episode out. His name is Michael Pizhadze. He's got some really cool, awesome, cutting edge technology that he's developed. You know, this matrix, and it can scan the body using just a pair of headphones and sense any kind of energy dissonance in the body, different organs, down to a cellular level. Like I dropped my hair off and he was looking at my hair and he brought up this whole, he's like, I mean, like the dude can tell, like I get like dry skin on my leg. I'm like, how did you could tell that from my hair, man? You know what I mean? I'm like, cause I had got a tattoo worked on and, and so the skin was dry in that area. And he could, I mean, like it's pretty crazy that he could look at my hair and figure out I got dry skin on my leg. But I mean, it goes much deeper than that. You know, the question is how deep you want to go. I'm like, don't talk about that on the podcast, but you know, it was incredible. And he talked about how a lot of people walk around with the psychic ability. Most of them don't. The people who tested the highest when they were doing these tests in Russia were the ones that didn't even realize they were psychic. he was like, and the people who thought they were psychic and were like, trying to sell their abilities, they were the lowest on the scale. And I was like, that's pretty fascinating. I mean, imagine that, if you put that out in the world, and how many people are kind of walking around totally unaware that they're, they have this pretty amazing psychic ability. It's probably a lot of people, I bet.
Yeah. Totally.
Well, it comes down to a really simple truism, which is that if there's only so many clock cycles in a system, adding up to 100, a certain amount of them are doing the thing you're trying to do, and a certain amount of them are keeping track of the thing you're trying to do. And the more clock cycles you spend keeping track of stuff, the worse you are at doing it. And that's true for computer programmers. Computer programs meant to run fast don't have all these log lines, and they aren't writing stuff to the database because they need to run fast. And so a human being who's using their nervous system to connect and feel things is probably not going to be wasting their time keeping track of the steps they used.
Yeah. It's like you talk about in a lot of your writing, Bill, it's like the difference between, and I want to get into this too, because I love this subject, but between neurohacking and biohacking.
Yes.
And all the vast amount of difference between those two concepts and ideas. I would love for you to talk about a little bit about that, Bill. I mean, I have a lot of notes about.
Let me grab something.
Sure.
While he's grabbing something, Bill, can I riff for a second on the psychic abilities thing?
Go for it, bro.
So, what I think is really interesting, what you just hit on, which is so perfect, is like they talk about this in a lot of the Yoga Sutras as well, which is that people who have psychic abilities, truly, it's not that they're living in a different dimension, meaning that like there isn't this existence of I'm doing.
Right.
The psychic ability is happening.
Yeah, it's more intuitive than.
It's an occurrence.
Yeah,
it's an occurrence, and so this like egoic I am doing is like in direct conflict with the ability.
That's itself. Right. That's so well said. That's so well said, Mike. That's a perfect way to put it. Yeah, and in fact, I think the best real psychics really have to continuously work to stay the fuck out of their heads. I mean, just literally, because you'll kill your psychic ability, visiting the frontal lobe too often while you're trying to access it. I mean, that's my experience, and that's my understanding of it too, talking to a lot of mediums and psychics.
This is this is where it becomes so very cool to have representational mathematics at your back. Because the problem here is that the more you approach one of these vaunted, wonderful states of consciousness, the less you are able to remember it. It's like you've gone from having a giant notepad to a Post-it note to a grain of rice. You've got nothing to write on because you're in flow. And if you're trying to do an evidence-based approach and remember and talk to other people who've remembered things, then asking about memoryless states is kind of problematic. You can all sit around in a room, there's only so much you can do. But once you understand the nature of memory, once you understand that a nervous system evolved to flow through the world constantly, like swimming in a river or surfing. I live near the surf, so I get to watch surfers all the time. So once you get that the nervous system is not supposed to hold on to anything. There is nothing designed to freeze frame, even episodic memory. Even memory is a kind of an insult to flow. Now, memory isn't just humans, it's elephants too. But once you get that even memory is a problem, then yeah, of course, we won't be able to remember how well we're doing.
Mm-hmm. So then, if I'm understanding you, Bill, so then the actual act of self-referencing the idea that I am intuitive or I am empathic or not, or that I have telepathy or ESP is actually creating a block against that's amazing. Yeah.
It's like quantum mechanics. The minute you ask a question, you've changed the answer. Mm-hmm. And if you look at how, basically the scientific paper that my partner and I can lean heaviest on, Sensory Metrics of Neuromechanical Trust, this 60-page monster. The whole question is, how is trust formed? Why do you trust your eyes? Why do you trust your balance? Why do you trust you even exist? What is trust at a microscopic informational level? And the answer is interaction. And it's actually been known by the smart neuroscientists, it's just the ones who like recording neurons they don't have the bandwidth to actually prove this one way or the other. But the way nervous systems work is by interacting. Your eyeball predicts what it's going to see, and it veers over and it grabs it. It's always moving, anticipating, gathering up, and re-anticipating. It's complete flow. That's what the circuit's designed to do.
Wow. And to think of how far we've come, and you write about this, Bill, about how human beings, where our natural state is much more what we would call a flow state. We were built to do all these incredible things, we could go a long time without food. Our body knew how to reset itself without food. And some of the, in your article about neurohacking, you mentioned you make some great points about, when you're in a hunter group, you are in flow with your pack. You know what I'm saying? That's the Navy SEALs spend huge money and lose huge money sometimes trying to, get their graduates to achieve this flow state. And if they can't do it, they're not allowed. I mean, they can go through the whole training. I don't know. You guys probably read Stealing Fire. It's a great book about flow and about flow states and about,
one of our advisors is in the book, Mikey Siegel.
Okay. Oh, cool.
Mikey Siegel is one of our advisors.
Yeah. So they talk about how, the Navy SEALs have figured out how vital this flow state is, and really they won't allow allow somebody to become a SEAL unless they can achieve this state. And it's tough because it's not up until recently it wasn't a state that you could really train for. Someone would have to have, now they're learning they can start to have people practice different things. They brought in float tanks, sensory deprivation float tanks, meditation, and all these things. But, when you're a Navy SEAL, meditation tends to lead to compassion, and Navy SEAls don't have a lot of room for that. You know what I'm saying?
And flow tends to lead toward ignoring rules and categories.
Yeah, exactly. So you've got a conflict of interest there. You can see why it's a tightrope they're trying to walk.
It's amazing. It's like the universe has programmed in a backdoor hatch to world peace by making the SEALs want flow, which then leads to
right.
Well, the thing is that with basically my partner and I are seeing this contradiction with corporations a lot, because corporations want their teams to be efficient and productive and reasonably happy and not sue them and things like that. But on the other hand, many of these corporations are in the business of exploiting people, deceiving them, getting them to buy things they don't want or are bad for them, stuff like that. And so the contradiction is getting more and more strident.
Yeah.
As people get more and more miserable, more and more disconnected from each other, and the tools that they're making are worse and worse for people. So it's harder for a corporation to get people to be all woo-woo and together and then go back and carve the eyeballs out of babies. So you're right. The fundamental nature of resonance, and the flow state is it's a resonance of the brain with the body and of multiple brains and bodies with each other. That kind of resonance is all to all. It doesn't have an anti-symmetric part. There's not a plus and a minus, a yin and a yang. Resonance connects. There's not an anti-resonance somewhere else, a dark double of it which knocks out your resonance or something. It doesn't happen that way. So insofar as an organization is going to try to connect people to each other, it might as well realize we're meant to be connected and try to smooth out all the edges, including the ones to the outside world.
Yeah. Maybe close down those sweatshops in Cambodia before you go ahead and ask your employees to meditate on world peace.
Well, I'd say shut down the time on device requirements, which are getting kids addicted to tablets.
Yeah. I agree with you. I have kids. So, I mean, it's real. And it's going to be, we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg. What's going to happen when these kids get older? And,
unfortunately, every single bit of evidence is that we are on the cusp of a catastrophe of mental health, because no other generation in human history has ever been asked to behave like an adult without looking at adults or to use their eyes while they were basically trained on sparkling dots. The eyeballs are meant to lock on 3 space and continuous life. And you start putting flashing pixels in a visual system, it will get screwed up.
Yeah.
Now, nobody wants to study that. Nobody's paying to study it. Nobody wants the answer because there is so much money in doing what we're doing now.
That's right.
But the idea that a brain can learn object constancy by looking at non-constant non-objects is a rather strange one.
Wow. That's, I figured out by the time my children were my first son was 2, that I read an article and I realized that, you can't let them even be around the TV because it jacks up their processing, and I thank God I stumbled upon that article when I did, because I was able to, kind of change my behavior, make sure they were not, interacting in that way with a screen. But I see a lot of parents who just literally from the time the kids are infants, take them out to dinner, prop them up, put the iPad in front of them, let Peppa Pig play. Even if some of the kids obviously aren't even old enough to even really understand what the fuck's going on, but they see Peppa Pig and they're like, the drool's coming out. But, I'm thinking about, my God, what's the processing in these kids and what's happening and their let alone their dopamine levels when they get old enough to really enjoy it. And, I see it in my 7-year-old, he's just, my 10-year-old is a little more, he's got a little better governor, and he's able to go with the flow. My 7-year-old, he started a little younger because the older brother had access. So it's a struggle with him. He gets very emotional,
Bill has this paper. I forgot the title of it, Bill. Maybe you can plug it, but the one that has the object permanence and the different principles.
This was my most impassioned paper, as my partner and I have been trying to stop the tidal wave of what's called educational technology. And it was a big thing, especially in COVID, because there's a lot of money in replacing teachers with tablets. Yeah. And because a lot of parents think teachers are lazy and they don't think there's tablets are lazy. And as long as superintendents and parents somehow think that a computer is more compassionate and human than human, there will be some incentive to start spending tax money on putting screens in front of people. And so to forestall this, which I think is a disaster for the nervous system, and as a neuroscientist, I would be delighted to discuss it with anybody on those terms, I wrote this paper with the rather provocative title, Monetizing Children's Brains Means the End of Our Species. And I defend it by encapsulating essentially the wisdom of neuroscience, mixing it with the wisdom of machine learning and data science, and then writing out 10 principles about learning, which are true both for self-driving cars and for babies. And that means they're really likely to be true. The first one is critical periods are critical, period.
Yeah.
And the last one is covert biometrics equals adversarial biofeedback. And there's a whole bunch in between.
What's that last one mean?
It means that basically one thing that a lot of these educational technology devices are doing, for instance, the worst of them are monitoring not just whether the kid answers the questions right or wrong, but how quickly they do it, whether they type in wrong answers, what their typing speed is, whether they're looking at the screen, whether they've got blood perfusion, what their heart rate is. You get the idea, right?
Yeah.
The gadget is taking 50,000 data points per hour
Wow.
on every kid in the classroom, and logging it for life. That kid has now got their entire emotional vibratory fingerprint locked in the servers of some big bad national database, which is now combining it with others and is going to predict that kid's life choices and make money off them. So the idea of measuring someone's biological signals and keeping it for one's own good, that's adversarial biofeedback. It's taking the information the person should get themselves, like Sensi is giving to the person. It would be as if Sensi took the data, didn't show it to you, and then sold it to Google instead.
Yeah.
That's what these companies are already doing.
I know. That's how they've made enough money to, buy half the countries in the world. That's exactly how they've done it. They've taken our data without our permission most of the time, and sold it and sold it and sold it. And they make money off it at every turn. They make money off the people who are selling things to us.
There's one bit of good, I see Mike wanted to say something, but one bit of good news, which is worth thinking about, which is that companies which are deciding whether to train algorithms on data like that should really think carefully, because it turns out there are legal precedents that if they've trained it on illegally gotten data, data gotten from children under 18, data gotten from, racially suspect situations or something like that, they actually have to throw away the whole thing. The entire huge stack of learned stuff is not only useless to the business because it's based on something old and outdated, but it's actually illegal. And so I'm hoping that the executives who are making decisions over how to use learning and how to use data are going to start plugging in a little common sense and human decency, because it's possible that not just will they prove to be evil, but they might actually be caught by the government and have to throw away all their toys.
God willing, somebody does something. My God. The problem is they're all getting paid. They're all, that's another discussion. That's a different podcast. But go ahead, Mike. You wanted to say something, I think.
Yeah.
Inside of Bill's paper, so all of that is amazing, and inside of there's one of the 9 principles. One is object permanence, and
right.
And the one I love about riff on it, Bill, but just 1 second what I love about object permanence is that it brings a really grounded foundation to not only the problem that's to come, but really the current problem that we're all collectively faced with in some way, shape, or form. But what object permanence is, Bill, if I understand it correctly, is, or do you want to share what it is, Bill?
Well, tell me what your thought is. I can keep talking forever.
The piece that I took from that object permanence that, is why my kids, I've got a 3.5-year-old and a 1-year-old, and like they get no screen time, like very, very, very small. Is that in object permanence, as a growing child, I pick up an object in 3-dimensional space. I put the object down behind me. I turn back here, I do something, I turn back, I grab the object, and I come back here. In that experience, I'm training the nervous system to develop intuitive trust in myself and to know that that object is there. And it's relational to the object, and that doesn't exist in 2-dimensional space. And so what I got from Bill's paper on that principle is essentially, with all these kids being on tablets and on screens, they're actually not only are they not cultivating the object permanence, therefore they're not cultivating intuitive trust and trust in themselves, they're actually stripping the trust in themselves. They're not going to have it. So they're not going to, if you don't have a trust in yourself, you have no orientation for how to show up in the world, which is just a breeding ground for anxiety, stress, depression, all of the mental health issues. And to me, Bill, that core principle, it's really what I'm solving for with Sensi, which is that it's our feelings. It's our feelings. And for some reason, we have this childish relationship to our feelings. It's really an immature relationship collectively. I'm speaking broadly.
It's the patriarchy's fault.
I'm not going to put any labels on what it is, but
okay,
but maybe, but it's all of our fault. It's no one's fault. I think when we come from a place of more clean eyes of and this is what I'm trying to do is create a more inspirational narrative of it. Like, hey, what are the significance of our feelings? Like let's make feelings right and give them a seat at the table. And in that, start to build the tools to not only explore how amazing our lives can be when we expand deeper into our feelings, which is our wisdom, but then also have these tools accessible for people who aren't embodied or are on the journey of becoming more embodied. I want to pause there. And did I get object permanence right, Bill? Was that?
Oh, yeah. So let me see if I can stitch those two things together, that it's the patriarchy's fault, it's no one's fault, and our lack of object permanence is leading everybody to not understand their feelings. Because those are all tied as part of the same thing. So, the word the patriarchy is thrown around by a lot of people waving red flags and making it sound like a battle cry for something. And then, elderly white males like me get to be offended because in every respect, I'm part of the patriarchy. I think of the patriarchy in a more abstract way as material culture. So if you say paleo culture was all of us before we had clothes or tools or art, and it was just human beings and plants and food. And that's it. That's your universe. No physical objects other than the ones nature gave us. Those are sitting around. Our nervous systems evolved to lock onto those things because they sit still. So our nervous systems are fancy enough that we're not only aware of things we're looking at and touching in real time, but they can store kind of copy, so when you go back and look, it's still there. So a toddler is, the way they found this at about age 2, if you put a puppet behind a screen or a little curtain and then pull the curtain and the puppet's not there, at about age 2, the kid will be, huh, what? Something's wrong here. Whereas normally, toy, not toy, curtain, not curtain, whatever, just stuff is there and then stuff isn't there. Like Teletubbies. If you ever watched that show, it's like stuff just happens, there's no trajectory. So we need to have things stay in 3 space because we lock in 3 space and our memory is indexed into 3 space. On a tablet, it's not, the tablet is there. There's a metal object with a piece of glass, but the patterns on the glass are always changing. So it's not just that the overall pattern is you touch the red thing and it turns green, and that's weird and interesting because in the outside world things don't change when you touch them, but that even the pixels themselves and even the screen refreshes, the fact that everything is sparkling and moving underfoot so fast that your brain stitches it together in a different way. So the fact that we perceive videos and moving things on screens is a remarkable testimony to the ability of a mature visual system to make sense of a handful of flickering dots. Because we take the flickering dots, we connect the dots into a smooth thing, and then we appreciate it. But if you've never learned to do that in the first place, if you haven't trained on the continuous real world of continuous permanent objects, you're just looking at a bunch of sparkling dots. And they stay sparkling dots. You haven't learned the continuity underneath. So the sad thing is our nervous systems are latently continuous. But we are so data starved at building that continuity that we're always looking for changes and outliers. We are thirsty for bright colors, sharp corners, twinkles. Anything different is what we use to register our mental wireframe against the reality which is out there. And so we are looking for edges, we're looking for outliers, we're looking for novelty precisely because it's rare. And now we've got machines, which are machines, they're material things. They are like cave walls on steroids with electrons in them. And these things were designed, just like cave paintings, they were designed to make us pay attention. Because we pay attention to bright colored, interesting, sparkly, new, novel things which change when you touch them. That's the whole point of the circuit. Unfortunately, an iPad in front of a kid represents a literal hack of curiosity. Curiosity was meant to pick up bugs and sticks, things which are neutral, natural, and would sometimes poke you, right, under your own power. But things would sparkle on their own and then dance ahead of your eyeballs and then try to figure out what you're going to want before you think it. That is not a set of training data that a human nervous system will productively learn from. It is poisoned training data. And the reason it's everybody's fault and nobody's fault is that this is just the lensing effect of material communication. As soon as people communicate with something which involves a cave wall, a piece of parchment, a silicon server, or a billboard, any of those things are communicating through stuff, and that requires stuff, otherwise known as money. But the paleo hardware didn't have that in it. So it's the nature of communicating with material stuff, which has this refracting effect, and it takes all of the messages and bends it toward productivity. Make you focus, make you be a good citizen, make you follow the rules, because there's no budget for the stuff which tells you to sit back and meditate.
And on that note, what Bill's saying when he says material to me, like that's the dilemma, because from the material perspective, we're looking to solve this bigger problem through the lens of the broken system. And we need a new paradigm, which is already emerging, which is looking at us, what we are, as an energy being, right?
Yes.
As a being comprised of energy. And in that, and to Bill's point about, not making about the patriarchy, because when we evolve the narrative to energy, all of us have masculine and feminine energy. Like we all have that. And from that place, there are women that are they're more masculine than men, and there's men that are more feminine. I mean, and there's some men that are more feminine than women, and so in this way, we're all having some part in the current mess, and we can all play a part in the solution if we can evolve this narrative to seeing ourselves as a different organism than this material fixed thing, which we are not, clearly, right? that we are this energy being, and we learn how to work with our energy systems. We can learn how to self-regulate. We can learn how to transcend. We can learn these deeper states of being that, you were talking about earlier with like Joe Dispenza. And Bill's got some really interesting points on this with.
I want to ask you guys. So you're right. We are energy beings, and if you just take the word energy in the hippie sense and just put in the word information flow in the technology sense, they're exactly the same. So everything hippies call energy, I call information flow. We all agree. But I want to ask you guys, each of you, what do you think is really the difference between masculine and feminine? Because I've got my own little mathy, theory, geeky way of understanding it, which I like running by people. But I want to hear what you think those words mean first, and then we'll see if mine match.
I mean, I just, when I think of masculine, feminine, I just think of a difference in shape almost. Like, I just think of the masculine being straighter lines, and the feminine being circular. I think of the geometry of it. Probably because I'm a sacred geometry geek, but closet geek. But
I want to talk about that stuff.
but look, I understand, because I've been told that I can be a little too yin energy as a podcast host, and yet I don't, and it's only when I'm talking to some people. When I'm talking to like you guys, I notice that I don't really have that kind of. I'm much more yang, and I also love boxing, and I can be very, rah whatever. But it's a different energy, obviously. Yeah, it's kind of a dumb answer, but yeah.
Okay, Mike.
I thought it was a great answer. I think I'd say something similar, which is just linear, non-linear, right? So masculine being linear, feminine being, stochastic, not non-linear.
Okay. Those two actually both overlap pretty well. So one is sort of hard-edged versus soft-edged, hard-shaped versus soft-edged, and linear rule-based versus less linear and more evolving. My version is actually not just about people or even about creatures, but I could literally apply it to Roombas and robots and submarines. So it's a style of information gathering, a spectrum from one end to the other. And we have submarines on both ends. So you guys know about the run silent, run deep kind of submarines. They lurk around near the ocean floor. You can't even hold a metal wrench, because if you drop it, it'll give away your position. You get the idea, right? Quiet engines, don't make any sound, listen for the enemy, as it were, right?
Right.
That is a process of continuous, very subtle activity. There's no particular on or off or start time or end time to the process of listening as you float your submarine along the ocean floor. Then there are the other kind of submarines, and you've probably seen them in the movies. They go, bing! Oh, yeah. They make an echo sonar, and it illuminates like a searchlight. It sends the sound waves out, which bounces off everything and comes back. They have a brilliantly clear view of where they are. Everybody knows where they are. It takes a whole bunch of energy, and you have to stop while you make the ping, gather the echoes, figure out what you're looking at, and then go to the next step. So it's a question of how much you are smoothly flowing through life versus how much you are stopping, calculating, planning, injecting energy in a kind of a pulse-like fashion. So I call it pingers and listeners. And I know this because I am married to someone who is an inveterate listener. She ran a professor who runs discussion groups and knows how to coach people in all sorts of wonderful ways. Female, of course. And I am in the inveterate pinger, and at Caltech, I would ask half the questions in a class. I mean, I'm worse than the regular Caltech people. I interrupt a lot. When we're in France, this is great. This is how it works in France, right? So we both learned to speak French somewhat differently. I was in West Africa. I didn't have to use it that much, but I got a chance jabbering away. So I can't hear the French language very well. But when I talk, I can choose my words, and I know what I want to say. So I figure out a way to say what I want in a way where I can get a yes or no answer. And then I get a yes or no answer. Or they come back to me, and they're saying all this French stuff, which I cannot understand. Then my wife listens to that. She understands. She says to me in English what they just said, and I talk back to them in French. because I am better. Basically, my communication style is from self-expression. If I'm bad at listening and if I'm bad at feeling my own feelings, my best bet is to bang on the world and make sense of the echoes.
Right.
And as far as I'm concerned, that second thing is yang. Being a pinger is the nature of a body which is meant to go far away in the outside world, forage, strategize, hunt, forestall enemies, and essentially do kind of long-range, high-energy planning, intensive spatial stuff. Whereas the yin is kind of looking at people's eyes and getting a sense of flow and adjusting things in real time. So it's close range, social, and subtle. And it happens that Homo sapiens seems to have divided that most of the males are doing most of the yang stuff and most of the females are doing most of the yin stuff.
Yeah.
But they're just different information processing styles, and the DNA is kind of irrelevant.
Yeah. And there are there are even a few species on Earth where those two roles are, I say roles, obviously they're not identical, but the general roles are reversed. You see that the female is the hunter and the male is kind of in charge. And that happens. I mean, and just imagine if there are a few species here on Earth where the archetype is one way most of the time. Imagine when you get off into other worlds and different species and different planets and how different things are there. It's just, I think that the sky's the limit. But I wanted to ask you, Bill, I loved your question, by the way. Thank you for asking it. But I wanted you to talk a little bit about neurohacking versus biohacking, because I loved your article about it. And like I could read the whole article. I think but I don't want to kill people with. But
that's
please,
one of my favorites.
Yeah, and so go ahead.
Basically, biohacking. There's two different ways. Biohacking and neurohacking, I would say, are separated by time scale and substance. Now, biohacking tends to be what you're going to eat or what temperature you're going to endure. It's got something kind of chemical or thermal about it, and it typically takes days to weeks to figure out if it's working. And so it's dietary stuff and all. I mean, yes, those are all real things and they do those things, and I try to eat the good stuff and not the bad. But there's already sort of a danger, because if you're talking about doing without biohacking, where you're, say, taking cold showers and not eating once a week or one day a week, fasting or something, you're doing without. You're doing without warmth, you're doing without certain food. And so it's uncomfortable and it takes a certain amount of willpower and it's probably going to benefit you. So there's not going to be a great ad budget for it. Now, the biopacking, where you take supplements that you pay for, that has an ad budget. So the biohacking we get to hear about is tilted enormously by material culture towards stuff which makes money and is adding into our system and is not very paleo, and is farther from the kind of paleo stuff which is just more of the suffering that we usually like trying to get away from. I mean, the key rule is discomfort is data that you need but don't want. Practically all the discomfort we have is actually something we're supposed to have. Now, neurohacking, it's a term I made up, but I just want to distinguish stuff which requires ingesting things and takes weeks from something which might be a solid object and you can press against your body and off in milliseconds. Neurohacking is about adjusting and tuning the neuromechanical vibrations, whose time scale goes into the microsecond regime. So this is millions of fold or billions of fold faster in feedback time than any of the biohacking stuff, because you can try it on and off. It's like meditation, but meditation and yoga require that you be able to actually sense things. Mike, to your point, you were talking about how people need to get back in contact with their feelings. Well, I'm exhibit A of somebody who wasn't in contact with his feelings, and that's how I got to be a theoretical physicist. I concentrated on what I'm good at and I can defend. And that's how I come up with things like carbon rods. Because once you understand the body is made on essentially ultrasonic vibrations, little tiny micro nanoscopic vibrations, molecular level almost literally, which are figuring out where we are and how our muscles are moving. It's a neuromechanical thing. Carbon fiber is the best substance available in the industrial world for transmitting signals from one place to another. So for instance, if I stick that into my palm there, and I stick the other end into my palm, this whole thing weighs less than an ounce. And I'm pressing my palms together. And so each palm is feeling this kind of white hot pressure tip with the same vibrations. This fiber rod is taking the ultrasonic vibrations and rattling them around. So now my brain has to contend with my two hands, which feel like they're touching each other even though they aren't. So you can connect your forehead to the wall. You can connect your sternum to another person's sternum. You can connect your teeth to something heavy, or you can just bite in this thing and let it ring like some sort of a weird unconscious whistle. But once you understand the unconscious foundation of our feelings, then you don't have to concentrate only on exercises which require you to be aware of them. So these you might call meditation tools, because even if you can't feel what it's doing, it does it anyway. And you do stuff like this while doing yoga, you're going to be in training essentially ultra-high frequency vibrations in what you might call the higher chakras, but those are going to be locked in while you're, bending your hip bones or something.
Right.
And so there's all sorts of crazy things to do once you know the nature of the circuit you're trying to hack into and all of the stuff you can do with it, which you wouldn't have thought of otherwise. That's where being a physicist gives you superpowers.
Right. And basically, it's like you said when we started this podcast, Bill, you said, the brain has this amazing habit of attempting to make everything subconscious, because that is the way to make it as expedient as it can possibly be for the human body's, interaction in three-dimensional reality.
You got it.
I tell, when I'm teaching my kids or showing them something, I'm like, this is just how you got to practice it for now. It's going to come to a point when you don't even have to think about it anymore, and so they, the kids learn that, but they need constant positive feedback. My kids need constant positive feedback. But, and so it's like, when I think of neurohacking, I think of everything that you just said, it's just so clear to me that we have this innate ability and access to things that I think that most of the time in our society, people never become aware of unless they go inside, unless they learn to tap into it, but there's like this wealth of knowledge and ability that's all there. But we live in this giant distraction, literally and figuratively. I mean, and there's distractions in the distraction to top it all off, just to make sure, and so we don't stop and access that, but there's so much there. And I just,
what would you do to try to run it the other way? What kind of new invention do you think would help getting people to move the opposite from that way?
Well, I think things like what Mike has created, I think, like the things that Hunter's work that I'm working on with him, and if people are aware that the habits that they have aren't healthy, they can at least first begin to say, okay, well, if it's not good for me to be in front of my screen and be in constant communication with people only on my tablet or my phone, and I'm not happy anyway, so maybe I should literally take a hike, like they say that's good for you. So I just think that the more we can spread awareness, I don't know if any one invention is going to come close to rivaling this technology that we have. It's such a powerful stimulus especially for young kids. But I think that, the awareness that we can spread and it's, you're fighting consumerism. Literally, you're fighting, companies like Facebook and Google, who, their algorithms are designed to keep people literally addicted, literally just thumbing away, and they're good at it. They've gotten really good at it. I mean, I find myself, I'm like, why can't I just and I got to throw the phone, because I'm like, I just keep thumbing at this thing and I don't even know why I'm thumbing anymore, So
it was a little bit of a trick question, because when we say invention, almost all of us who've worked in tech tend to think of a kind of a high-tech invention, which probably has transistors in it or something like that. But there's an invention that I swear by. It's called ecstatic dance. And it has it's just 6 words, really. It's basically no shoes, no talking, no judgment. And they get a place, like last night, the friend of ours who brought ecstatic dance into Silicon Valley, and like a Johnny Appleseed, she just like spent her life giving Silicon Valley tech people a chance for autonomous motion, hippie church on Sunday morning. She lives near here. Last night, she had the silent disco headphones, which are running off some kind of Bluetooth, down on the beach. So there were a whole bunch of us were flailing around barefoot in the sand. There was this old weird fog around the mountains, and there was these waves crashing out there and a bunch of surfers bobbing away in the waves. But it is this, and of course, as you spin your head, the sound is locked onto you. So you're having this 3D experience of a fixed room while your body is spinning, it's kind of like virtual reality. It's kind of like an inconsistency your nervous system finds it hard to deal with.
Yeah.
But the point is, ecstatic dance is an invention. It's called a container in the language of the Berkeley, Oakland hippie crowds. But you can invent ways for people to interact. You can invent a board game. You can invent a card game. You can invent patty cake. And those are the kinds of things.
Yeah.
Some of them will be just games with carbon rods. Some will be games with patty cake. Some will be games with smartphones. But if it's a game or an interaction that people can do, which is fun, then we'll be able to invent new kinds of fun, which is a lot better than just telling people to not do the things that they happen to like doing on their devices. So I think it's going to be much better to play Nikola Tesla. And he invented like lightning and electricity. We need to invent vibratory fun, which is so cool that the devices are just boring in comparison.
Yeah. I was just imagining this app that you have to plant your feet and ground yourself into the earth to play, and I mean, there's got to be a way to
exactly
harness it, but to get people plugging into the earth instead of just the tablet would be a big thing. I think would be very healthy for people. Or
just imagine taking some stiff little thing like this. 2 people, you press your sternums together, and now you try to dance, or you walk back and forth like on a balance beam or a railroad track or something, right?
Yeah.
Some sort of collaborative mechanical dance-like thing, which doesn't yield any particular profit, but it's fun, and you can tell when you do it right. Like playing catch on steroids.
It's I love the way it was framed about what I was hearing essentially was creating a better reality, right, and a better version. So it's sort of like adding rather than trying to tell them to take away, and that's the thing that I'm like most obsessed about is that question of like, how do we help people fall in love with their bodies? Because this is the frontier. Like we know so little. I mean, we're starting to have all these breakthroughs because people are starting to look at it and people are starting to experiment with it more, the body, from they used to think that you couldn't hold your breath longer than like a minute, right? A minute and a half. And now you have guys free diving, doing 10-minute breath holds and like going to depths where they used to previously think if you went down to that the lungs would implode and you die. And it turns out this thing adapts to all kinds of different environments we didn't know was even possible. And there's so much to be explored about this body. And so the more we can help ourselves, I think what I was hearing earlier was like, the more I can fall in love with this body and the more I can experiment with it and find cool shit and be like, hey, wow, look at this, and then go and share it from this place of just like joy and delight. I think it'll be just a faster, rapid expansion that we can have. Right.
Yeah.
Otherwise we're just going to recreate the problems of like the early settlers coming to like Hawaii and like ransacking the Hawaiians and telling them to stop surfing naked, like
barbarians.
yeah. They were the barbarians. Everyone was doing that. And we got to come from this place of joy, and let joy be our new ritual. Let joy and love be our new church, like this, like inner.
It's true, man. And like I just all the healing, all the journeys. I know so many people who are on. I mean, everyone is on a healing journey, whether they realize it or not. But some people are very consciously on a healing journey, and they imagine they have this, and some of them do because they've created that. But they imagine they have this big fiery bridge to cross. And don't get me wrong, some of them very well may have that bridge to cross, but across the bridge is self-acceptance. Across that bridge is self-love. It is this burning patience and love that you have for yourself, no matter what you do, no matter what happens. And, you know, I just think of myself when I was across the bridge, and how I didn't realize that, you know, it was always me standing on the other side of the bridge, waiting with open arms for myself to cross, because it was always me I needed to accept, me and all, you know, warts and all, as they say, you know, all, because that's once you have that, then that comes out into the world, into everything that you do, and to everyone you meet, you know, but that has to be there first. I think that's the key.
Well, just to basic, yeah, as a sort of a devil's advocate kind of point toward that. So that's absolutely where it's supposed to wind up. But there's another piece which I don't know how to train people into this, but I have a hunch that if we could, it would help. And that is the other love. For instance, imagine if it were just true in our culture that everybody gives somebody else a massage for at least 20 minutes every day. So you know yourself to not only have capacity for self-love, but have a capacity to make someone else feel better. And that part of your existence on this earth is to use your hands to make somebody else have a few fewer aches and pains or a little bit more calmness. And that way, if you happen to have one of those dark nights of the soul where you don't have that self-love for a few weeks, and you might consider something drastic, you just know in your bones that other people still need you. So feeling needed and knowing that your existence is making other people feel better, that is, I'd say, just as important as self-love. Yeah. You know, the sense of being important to the people around you. And I don't know how to put that back in now that individualism, patriarchy, and iPhones have removed it. But
no, you're right, though. You're right. Absolutely. You know, I mean, I'll never forget I was reading Neil Donald Walsh years ago, and he was in conversation with God, because that's what the books are, in conversations with God. And God said to Neil, when you meet someone, the first thing you could ask yourself, instead of, I wonder what that person is here to bring into my life, you know, what that person is here to do for me, is what gift can I give this person? I mean, literally, I'm talking to you guys right now because I began to practice this in my life. And when I met Hunter, I read his, it's a long story, but I ended up, the phone's going to ruin my monologue anyway. Hold on one second. Perfect timing. It shut off. Sorry. So, I mean, I'm what I was saying was, I just, you know, like, what gift can I get? I'm just going to do this for this person. I don't think anything could ever come of it. I don't even really know them that well, but I'm just going to do it anyway, you know? And that's kind of how I ended up getting very close with Hunter, and why I'm sitting here talking to you guys is just asking that question, like, what gift can I give this person? Even though I just met them, you know, I just thought that, and it's a great point you made, Bill, and a great, I don't know if you're playing devil's advocate with it, but you're certainly playing advocate in the right way. Yeah. So thanks for making the point, because it's a great point. You know?
Mike, it looked like you wanted to say something.
Oh no, I think you guys got it. It was perfect. Yeah.
So Mike, this app, dude, I downloaded it earlier. I didn't have time to get into it, but you know, how age friendly is it? You know, like how well does it keep up with a person throughout the day? And like, what else can you tell us about it? Because I'm sure some people are going to be interested in looking at it right away.
Yeah. I mean, actually I'll tie that in. I'll answer that by tying that into what you were just talking about, cool. Which is one of the ways we're currently using it is with teams and with coaches, and measuring the connection between a group. So kind of like talking what Bill was getting at earlier about how can we start to facilitate this in a way that tips, right? And the act of, like, let's just say we're a team, you know, actually checking in on how the team feels on a daily basis, daily or weekly, whatever the cadence might be, and being able to visualize that on a Samsung flat screen, so you can see how the team is feeling, what percentage of them are in blocks versus flowing, and knowing that that's a leading indicator for the performance and the success and the health of your team. And then interweaving this idea of peer-to-peer support. And that's part of what we're focusing on in terms of like rolling it out, is how we can help create the work environment to be this nourishing place of support. One of the challenges that we're up against is just sort of the existing level of consciousness, because so many corporations want to use the data to like manipulate. And it's like, no, we have to shift the consciousness, and we have to understand that we can use this data to support and uplift. And if the team's blocked, to be able to get ahead of it by doing some breathing exercises, and to come back into harmony. And so we have a data dashboard where teams can visualize that. And it doesn't track you passively during the day. We design the technology intentionally so that it's something you do consciously as a way to cultivate trust in yourself and build your intuition. And so you do it as an active check-in. And then in that sense, it can help you identify things you might not be aware of. So to your point, you're talking about unconscious earlier. Right now we run about 30 to 40% of the time, we can help people identify places they might have been blocked that they were unaware of, and then help them clear it pretty quickly through breathing exercises or different techniques. The current iteration of the app, you download it, you do a self-awareness assessment. Mm-hmm. That self-awareness assessment is how you calibrate Sensi. So you basically tell what the emotion you're currently feeling, if you have tension or not. You do the gesture, then you pick an opposite emotion. So maybe you picked joy initially, you do the gesture, then you pick, let's say, fear, you do the gesture. And we basically have a motion baseline for your joy state versus your fear state, which we can use for identifying what state you're in presently.
Oh, okay, I see. Yeah.
And if there's other sources of stress in your life.
What's your vision for it, man? Like, where do you see it? I mean, obviously, you're kind of limited right now with the motions in the phone, but I'm sure that you have a grander vision for this. You want to tell me about it? I mean, I want to hear about it.
Yeah. I want to explore how amazing this gift is, this gift of life. And on the other side of healing and mental health, there's intuition. And there's wisdom and there's knowing, right? There's these things where we've all experienced it, right? Where all of a sudden we're just like, oh, and there's just a knowing. It's just like a download that happens. What's that? And what are the conditions and the qualities that help facilitate more of that? And when I'm in that and I share my energy with you and others, what happens when we all tip into that sort of state? What can we co-create together? Like, what can we bring to the earth plane when we're in these higher states of resonance? That's what I'm really interested in, is like when I'm connected so deeply to my heart, what kind of relationships can I create and connect to? And then from that place of those relationships, what kind of ripple effect can we have in our society? And what kind of dream can we consciously dream here on earth together? That's what I'm really interested in.
That's cool.
Sorry, Paul. Go ahead.
Sounds like all three of us, or all four of us, are in some sense trying to light the fire of enlightenment one way or another. We've each actually talked about making games, but the gamifying through apps is different from the gamifying through dance and playing with pieces of plastic. But ultimately, yeah, that's the vision. We know the nervous system is capable of exploding into something like communion and bliss. Mm-hmm. And it's ever more important that it do so soon.
Yeah.
And so that's the part that you guys just hit on that I'm most excited about, which is in the enlightenment experience, there's disembodied enlightenment and there's an embodied enlightenment. And I think it's really important that we have embodied enlightenment. I don't know if it makes sense to elaborate on that or not, but like, the thesis I have is based on my own journey, which is just you can have expanded states of awareness and then lack in the maturity category. And this is where you see sort of like
whenever somebody does acid and they come back and they're like, man, I saw everything, man.
That's an example. Also, the other example is like these gurus who take advantage of their students. They'll have a rapid expansion of awareness. They didn't actually mature their consciousness, and so now with this
Kanye
rapid
West.
if you call him a guru, maybe.
Well, I mean, he wants to. I mean, he had something. He had some kind of expanded awareness because then he decided he was going to run for president and he should be God. But,
I don't know. Anyone who wants to run for president is something I would question. Is a rapid expansion of awareness.
Got it.
My own personal judgment. But
you guys know who? Go ahead. Finish your thought, Mike.
Oh no, just saying that the body is key to it. The body is key to it. There's so much trauma and so much of our the body keeps a score, right? Like that book, and it's in and through. And so the more we can bring people into their bodies through these gamified experience or whatever they might be, I think that the better off we're going to be.
Yeah,
I mean, the way I would add on to that is that once you look at what a nervous system is, a brain is a jelly management system for vibrating muscle tissue. Pretty much all. Your eyeballs, vibrating tissue. Your eardrums, vibrating tissue. It's all vibrating. The only thing which isn't vibrating tissue is smell and a taste. And those are the slow ones.
Right.
So everything about a brain in every creature for 500 million years has been about vibrating tissue. In the last few million years, there's a little bit of memory in like chimps and elephants and us. And in the last 50 to 100,000 years, there's things called words and symbols and stuff. But all of the stuff, the idea of a disembodied mind is an invention. Mm-hmm. I don't think there's any natural example of that. And the only way to imagine it is to just sort of make up stuff that our mind does, which isn't actually based on real life. Yeah. So, Mike, you are as right as it can be. The only kind of enlightenment one could possibly have is relating the brain to the body, because that's what the brain is designed to do.
And then what's exciting about that, and I actually don't know if we talked about this, Bill, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. But what's super exciting about that is as we come into the body and we start to love our body, we have all throughout our muscle fiber, we have sensory organs. And that's what I'm really curious about is like, what can these sensory organs teach us? And how do those sensory organs work? Like everything from, say, muscle spindles, Golgi tendons, these different things that help us with our proprioception and interoception. Like we there's like so much information about the knowingness of it, I know that my body can orient myself in space and time. I know that my interoception can tell me how I feel, whether I'm hungry, whether I want to have sex. But what else is there that we haven't explored?
Well, basically, there's two categories of it. There's what traditional Western medicine does, and then there's what is actually going to do us some good. They're opposite. The traditional Western medicine approach is, Golgi, it's microstructure and anatomy. More details, pay for more people to poke finer and finer things, and then do some studies and tell them a few more details about it. I don't know how knowing the name Golgi tendon is going to help me get rid of a backache. From living my life, all of that stuff, and I'm a physicist, I'm too lazy to memorize things, so partly it's just disciplinary annoyance. But being halfway between physics and biology, I was incredibly frustrated that biologists are more interested in memorizing things which are wrong than in knowing simple principles which are right. And that's part of just being a professional scientist, because you've got to basically prove to everybody that you're worth paying. So all of science is about proving that you should be paid and not about actually getting a simple answer. The place we're going to get it is not more medical studies in the microstructure. It's an understanding how the data spaces that we live in our brains, in our heads, are weird and paradoxical. Like I was saying, how our brains fool themselves on purpose. That is really worth knowing. How discomfort is actually data. That's worth knowing. How we are supposed to feel ourselves in sort of blurred, approximate ways. For instance, the sort of the yogic sense, kind of the Alex Gray picture of your spine as a shaft of light and your body as a giant expanding toroid or something like that, right? Those are data spaces. They're hyper-simplified data geometries, which enable your brain to make the fastest possible assessment by blurring over the difference between your sinuses and your neck and your chest and your guts. I mean, they're all part of one thing. But it's the approximation and the funny shapes and the geometries which we need to learn about, not the Golgi tendons. We need to know, why do I feel this way? Why should I feel as if there's a cord directly from my nose to my toes, even though I'm bent double? And that's air. It's an air gap from here to here. Took me 50 years to realize I'm allowed to feel things which aren't actually inside my body.
I hear that. I think the one thing I challenge on that though is like the whole principle, like the whole concept of what is it? It's Western mind, Eastern body. I think it is, right? Where like this Western mind has a depth of wanting to understand, not for everybody, but just this idea that there's an organ in my muscles that is a sensory organ. I don't even know the name of it, but just knowing that is there, that my muscle is something beyond just a strength function, is something that I hope can help people start to learn to fall in love with their feelings. Because right now we have a system that seems to want to diagnose feelings and make them wrong without any physiological baseline for it. Like somehow psychology and physiology got stripped, and it's like the sooner we can bring those two back together and help people understand that their feelings are literally their God-given censor for their state, and that state is interdependent on external environment and internal environment, right? And
exactly.
that I'm hoping is a point to help them fall in love. And I'm with you. They don't need to know Golgi tendons, but I think
Golgi tendons get a bad name on this podcast. No, but I want to tell you guys. So, talk to this this wonderful man. His name's Rob Gauthier, and he's a channel and a very remarkable dude. And he was huge into meditation. He always had a very keen psychic and mediumship going on. And then he started to do the Gateway series. Long story short, he astral projected one day out of his body and found himself face to face with like this 9-foot tall reptilian being in a spacesuit, and he was on a ship. And he thought he had obviously broken something in his brain and was scared, yet here he was. There was also this feeling of like there's no danger, but this thing was toothy, and he was like, oh my God. The craziest, cool, funniest, most remarkable story that I heard in a long time when I heard it. And so it turns out that this being is, another part of himself from another dimension, another time, a higher dimensional, benevolent, reptilian hybrid. And so he eventually went back into he didn't meditate for like 3 weeks. He actually went to the emergency room afterwards because he thought and thank God he got the right doctor. The doctor was just like, lay off the binaural beats, son. Because they got the wrong doctor when he probably would have ended up, God who knows what they would have done to him. But eventually he made contact and they began dialogue with this being whose name is Treb. And one of the things that Treb, who he now channels this being and a few others, but he's a remarkable channel, and the information that comes through is just it's unbelievable. But Treb always talks about how human beings, why we are kind of we get this front and center stage throughout the galaxy is because of we're this incredible hybrid. We have all this DNA from all these different civilizations. We have some really amazing things packed into this machine, this technology, and we have just begun to unfurl that. Really, we're in our, maybe we're in our toddlerhood, but we're like toddlers running around, and that's how much we've grown and how much we've seen the capacity of our DNA thus far. So I think that we're going to a lot of these places, whether we realize it or not. Puberty comes for kids, whether they're ready or not. I think eventually, things are going to start to happen to our bodies that we're going to, they're going to be a little uncomfortable at first, but we're going to grow into them. But he talks about the emotional spectrum, and that one of the reasons why human beings are so fascinating to so many spacefaring creatures who are, more advanced in a lot of ways than us, but very few of them have our emotional range, and that emotional spectrum that we have is very powerful, and it cuts across dimensions. And he talks about how other species like his own, that they learn from watching humans, even at this stage in our evolution, because we have such a profound ability to feel. And do they see the struggle with it too? I mean, it's a lot. It is a lot, in our defense. Yeah. So I just thought that was worth sharing, that since we're talking about emotion and the emotional spectrum, and just how powerful it is.
Which, by the way, that the word spectrum just showed up, and it reminded me that is one of the other connections embedded in this whole thing, which is that everyone is becoming more and more spectrumy. If you think the autistic spectrum is roughly like I was saying, that Pinger listener spectrum, where the autistic end of it is sort of more flat voiced, less emotional thing, more logical, and etc. And I've lived on that for most of my life, so I know it well. But society and digital technology is pushing everyone that way. It's pushing us all into trying to parse and follow rules and make snap judgments based on categories. And that is not how nervous systems are supposed to work. It isn't even how reality works. So that's part of our getting back to love ourselves and get reconnected, is to make sure we aren't all becoming essentially more hobbled communicatively and emotionally.
Like the Greys. Do you guys know the story of the Greys?
No.
The Greys traditionally are those I don't like the word aliens, but they're the ETs, the beings that you see that kind of have that typical shape.
Okay.
The black eyes, and they look emotionless because what we've been shared with and what's been taught is that they came from, they're a future version of humanity that has let technology cut itself literally, physically, physiologically off from its emotions, and they destroyed their world. They used all the resources, and they were given an opportunity with their technology. They cloned themselves for the longest time. They could not reproduce. They needed viable DNA, and so they finally found a way, not just because space travel and all that stuff, becomes easy, but they needed a way to cross dimensions to continue their species. And so they found a way, and they got kind of galactic permission to come to our Earth, which was kind of not necessarily back in time, but back to a different time. And so they've been using our DNA to create hybrid children. And because the DNA is the same, it's just a lot younger, these children grow up. And what's amazing is, that they're obviously not growing up here. They're growing up, they say in ships, but like these kids have an ability to feel. And what happens to the parents when they see these kids is they're able to reconnect to their emotions in a way they haven't done in their whole lives. So you could say the powers that be, the I don't know how to put it, like the benevolent people who are overseeing things, or the benevolent energies, God, whatever you want to, allowed this to happen. You can see the kind of grand plan in it. And they say eventually, when human beings are ready, God knows when that'll be, that these hybrid children will be introduced, to people who, because they say that humanity as a collective is that we are the father and the mother of these children, because they use so much of our DNA to create them, to mix it with their own. But
it's funny that I'm hearing that as a metaphor for what's actually happening in individual brains. So essentially, anybody who knows what DNA is and knows how evolution works knows that you need a certain amount of fresh mutations and fresh scrambledness to keep from getting stuck in a rut. And the rut is like monoculture, where everybody's a clone of everybody, and then you all die of one same disease, right? So we understand very deeply how we need to have enough diversity of information, enough scrambledness in the genetic pool to be able to survive as a species. But we've forgotten that that's also true for an individual brain moving through the world. the diversity of information, the ability of a kid to have rocks and sticks and mud and grass and moss, and not just sparkly glass, right? So in some sense, what's hitting us at hyperspeed now is a lack of diversity of just the information sources our sensory systems get, which is exactly analogous to these characters who have cloned themselves and just tried to eat copies of the same thing. So copies of the same thing don't work, but if you look at how economies work, they work by standardizing, which is otherwise known as making copies of the same thing.
Yeah. And there's a lot of analogies in there. In fact, one of the reasons why they say that this whole interdimensional travel and kind of DNA collecting was sanctioned by the highest of the high was because they could also serve as a warning for our young race, which has already started to go down the path that destroyed theirs.
Cool.
So like there's kind of a grandiose plan and that you can see in it. And I think it's true. Sadly, you see human beings and kind of what we're doing, and monoculture is a big, look at what we've done to agriculture, to our planet. We're this idea that everything should be one way, and it's not good.
The problem is, so this is in some sense the crux point of where the laws of nature of economics are running into the laws of nature, because the nature of material accumulation and capital aggregation and stuff and standardization and material production is toward monoculture. Standardization of communication, of protocols, of languages, of factories, of devices, of corn, lumber. Standardization is what made our civilization exist in the first place. And it seems to be running full tilt off a cliff in which we've so far standardized stuff, our nervous systems can no longer survive on it.
Yeah.
And that particular path has been going on for about 1 billion years. Because every creature, every living thing is a kind of a standardization. If it makes copies of itself, that's standardizing something. So once DNA got working 1 billion or so years ago, our planet, our ecosystem has been getting more and more standardized until at the moment, one tiny subculture of one dominant species is filling the world with reinforced concrete and solar panels.
All right.
And pretty soon that's all we'll have left.
Yeah. That and about 12 inches of useless dirt, unless we do something fast. I don't believe this is the first iteration of humanity. And I'm sure that it won't be the last, one way or the other. But that being said, I have faith, and I just know that eventually the more people who kind of awaken to themselves, the more some of this stuff and this corporate madness that happens and is happening now, and the greed, which I think is the really, like, if you had to point to one thing that is the cause of most of the suffering on this planet, it's greed. It's
that's what I want to riff on, is like that and it connects all of the pieces that we've been talking about, which is greed is another way to describe emptiness, and a misidentification of who you are
and what you are.
Yeah. And so it's just a signboard of being lost, and that's what I'm really passionate about, that we're all being brought together, that we're all working in different ways that are all similar. And what I hear when you're talking and when Bill's talking is what we're looking to do is help guide people back to the only really fulfilling joy that we have is what's within us.
Yeah.
And then and what's great about that is that you can have all the material stuff. We're not making materialism wrong, but if you have the materialism without that connection to self, capital S, right? It's empty. I've had it. I've had
totally empty.
Yeah, my wildest dreams, and I was so unfulfilled. And what you're talking about with the environment and the human species, I know this is gonna sound super biased, but hopefully Bill can back me up from some good principles of like physics. The singular problem that we have is feelings. It's the singular problem, and people are projecting their the power of their feelings outward and thinking that it's out there that's going to help them feel better. And so the sooner we can all learn to self-regulate and learn that the feeling starts in here, it's just a rapid expansion of self, capital S, and a rapid expansion of self-mastery, a rapid expansion of when I can care about myself and I realize that it's in here, I'm then empowered. And when I care about myself, I'm way more likely to care about you guys. So I care about community. And when I'm caring about community, I'm way more likely to care about the environment.
Right.
And, when we have 8 billion people on Earth caring about the environment, like we'll clean it up.
But this is a switch from a survival instinct to a creative instinct. And I agree with you. It has to do with feelings, but my biggest roadblock that I see to that is that we don't even teach our children this fundamental, in our school systems anyway. So you have the masses of people growing up and they don't even realize, first of all, that we are light beings, that we are energy beings, that we are not necessarily just this flesh and blood. Yeah, we are that, we have that, but that is not who we are. So I agree with you, Mike. I just think that we have to there has to be a paradigm shift that catches on, man. It's got to be like a new school of thought that we're putting into the young kids' head, because they got to grow. If the young kids grow up knowing what they are and who they are, and that they have this ability to create, and that abundance is something that comes first and foremost from the heart and the mind, not necessarily simply from, I only have 12 apples left. Little Mikey can go screw himself because I'm going to be hungry this week. I know it. If they understand that there's always a way to create more, and that lack is a mindset, that it's a state of being that can be remedied, I feel like the world would change in a generation. I don't know.
That's it, and that's what we're engineering and building for, is exactly that. And to your point, it starts with the felt experience, of being aware that the abundance is within me and feeling that, not intellectually thinking it. That's kind of been, I think, the crux of the problem, is there's been so much like trying to think their way into it.
Yeah.
It's the felt realization, which then helps us to expand in that direction. Sorry, Bill, you were going to say something.
Yeah, basically, there are 2 of the 3 main ingredients you guys have on lockdown. One is for individuals to be able to understand their own sense-making, their own sensory experience enough to tell how much of their feelings are things they have control over from inside, and how much don't really depend on some arrangement of atoms in the outside world. The second being how to rediscover community, to which I'd add that it's not just caring about the environment, but once you can hang out with people for long enough, you can solve problems better by essentially getting into that kind of shamanic mumble zone where you hang around and make a bunch of ambiguous noises and then somehow the problem solves itself. That's a real thing. That's how it's supposed to work. The missing piece is when we say the problem is greed, that makes it sound like the problem is human beings who are greedy. Well, yes, there are greedy human beings, and that is a problem, but a spreadsheet can be greedy too. And we have delegated decision-making of greed to creatures which are not human, so we don't recognize they're greedy. So the problem is, if we say the problem is human beings are greedy, it's like the people who say the problem is teachers are lazy. Let's replace them with a computer.
No, you're right.
No, that doesn't follow.
You're right.
On that note, that's the fundamental shift of feelings, right? Because right now, it's the rules of the game. So the rules of the game right now are profit.
Yes.
So when you look at it,
they're corporate. They're corporate rules.
And the game is profit, and so they're playing the game well, and they're winning. They're winning at the game, right?
Yeah.
At a tremendous cost.
Winning.
Argue. But so we change the rules, where all of a sudden, feelings become the new currency, right? So when you really think about it, at the end of the day, when you think about the people who have had the biggest impact on you and your life, it's most likely someone who's made you felt a certain way. And so when we start to engineer technologies and solutions that can help people facilitate that for themselves, but then also help them to facilitate it for others, it starts to change the rules of the game. Right? And now we have other mechanisms we can put in place to create different types of monetization that are aligned with human
thriving,
human species. Human thriving. Yeah.
So I want to ask you guys before I forget. Mike, what's your experience? What's your experience with UFOs? How many ships have you been on? Have you been visited by the Greys? The government said it's cool now. You can admit that you believe in UFOs. There's no
right.
The propaganda has changed.
I'm very curious guy, so I follow all of the stuff that's like coming out about it. So I woke up one morning with a sore butt. I don't know what that was about. No, I'm joking. It's the kinky night with the wife.
Yeah.
No,
you asked for that.
I have not been visited. Hopefully that doesn't mean something about me, but I've had two experiences. I've had my first float tank experience. I'm just gonna give you a really brief one. If you want to go deeper, we can. Cool. But basically, when as soon as the container closed, I felt like I was gonna have a panic attack, and I realized if I had the panic attack, I was gonna get out. And so I just started doing a breathing exercise and meditation, and I immediately dropped into the deepest meditation of my life. And then I was in there for an hour and a half, and like literally a second went by, and all of a sudden the vibration came on, and the light started to come on inside the tank, and I was like, wait, I was only in there for like a minute and a half, and then all of a sudden I had this realization. It was so real that I was with talking apes.
Wow.
Yeah, I was with talking, like, when something's real, it's just like a full experience.
Yeah.
And like literally I'm sitting in this tank and I'm like, holy fuck, there's talking apes outside. And I'm going to have to go interact with them. And I was so overwhelmed. I didn't want to come out of the float tank. I'm like, I have to talk to talking apes. I wasn't scared. It was just it was like the cognitive idea of talking to an ape and taking it serious as it was talking to me that was like overwhelming. And I literally sat inside this room for like 15, I showered, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, all right, I'm going to go do it. And I like opened the door and there was humans, and I was like, oh, like, I'm still here on Earth.
Yeah. Thank God.
So I had that experience. And then I had another one on a psilocybin experience where I traveled to Egypt, and there was like very real, it was like it was some kind of combination of hieroglyphics and alien language that I was seeing. I didn't see any beings, but I was seeing the language scrolling.
Yeah, that reminds me of the first time I vaped DMT. This landscape was just, the hieroglyphics were, I don't know how to describe them. They were like extraterrestrial. They didn't, but they were something familiar about them, but they were like, yeah. So I think I know what you mean, but yeah. What about you, Bill?
So I have not had any of the UFO extraterrestrial kinds of things, probably because I grew up a physicist, son of two physicists, and I just didn't think that way. But I've had, even of the psychedelic experiences, probably the most telling one was when I was like 18, 19, tried something. It was MDA. It was at college. So this was not a precursor. That's a chemical description, but it was before MDMA.
Right.
In the same general family. And a buddy of mine who was this total wild, blue-eyed, hippie, almost Charles Manson face and stuff, who went on to become a professor of Buddhism at Cornell or something. So he had a respectable life, but back then we were just kind of hippie types. We did this trip together, and it was an amazing experience, and I got something which was by any means, it felt like an enlightenment experience. I knew what enlightenment experiences were, and it told me, this is a bona fide enlightenment experience. It's going to last about 4 hours, and then it's going to go away. But it's so real that you probably don't want to just try popping another pill and getting the view from 80,000 feet for 5 more hours. You might want to learn how to climb up the mountain so you can stay there. So the drug itself, by far the most impressive drug I'd ever taken in my life, told me not to do it again.
Wow.
And that pretty much the rest of my life, I haven't been chasing anything that strong, and when I've been chasing it, it's been under more control. But even ayahuasca didn't have anything like the effect that one did, or that other people get from ayahuasca. I basically did ayahuasca 3 times and not much happened.
You should
Except I was miserable. I was miserable for a while, and then finally I stopped being miserable.
You're like, this sucks.
Is that it?
I'm in the dark and people are throwing up. What am I doing here? My God, you want to hear an ayahuasca experience?
Wait. Before we go ayahuasca, have you had an experience with the Grays?
Well, not with the Grays. No. My experience has been I've had an experience in an ayahuasca ceremony, which was very, I was doing a lot of, I was training to channel and putting like training in meditation states and doing a lot of what they call CE5 meditations, which are, they're human initiated contact meditations. And, you can do them out, on a mountain and call in or vector in a UFO, or you can do them from your living room in New York City with a headlamp on. It doesn't. You can do them anywhere, and you don't necessarily need to. You don't necessarily need to have them physically show. You can remote view them in the meditation when you start to get fluent with them and with the meditations. And so I've had experiences in those meditations. I've had experiences in ayahuasca, but like the ayahuasca experience was, they were definitely mantis. They're kind of like, unmistakable. They look like just like praying mantises, and I just got into a dialogue, which was a lot of me asking questions, and the response was very energy affirming or not, I would ask a question and the answer would be clear because I would get this, this absolute profound energy running up and down my body. And then I ask another question, nothing would happen. So I would take it the answer was no, but so there was that, and there's just a few different experiences, like that. I've actually never seen a UFO. I saw one, but I was also on psilocybin, so it could have been that. It might have been that.
Slight possibility.
Yeah, but I've remote viewed a few. I played with remote viewing a lot, and I remote viewed a few ships.
One thing it's kind of remarkable how much humans can perceive things which other people don't perceive or other people don't believe are even real. But back in the day when our nervous systems evolved, there were no reproducible objects. Every rock was different, every bush was different, and there was no photograph, and there was no way to say that what you experienced didn't exist. So our minds and our perceptual systems are much more built around things like UFOs, where people wander around seeing weird stuff all the time, and then they come home and talk about it, and next day they go out and see more weird stuff. But it's not like you can catch anyone in a lie.
Right. And it's funny you say that because, 100 years ago, before the propaganda about UFOs and about people who see UFOs began, there was more of an acceptance and I've read some articles that date back to 1912 about UFOs and, somebody in Iowa who had a farm and a UFO crashed, and there was a nice write-up and they had a funeral for the being that was inside of it. And of course the government found out about it, dug it up, took everything. But at the same time, it's just amazing how simpler life was before we got so turned around with agendas and technology. And, I read that article. I was like, man, that just speaks volumes about these people that this falling, crashing, fiery disc crashed on their farmland. And what did they do? They took the little being that was in it out, and they had a funeral for it, and they buried it, and they had a gravestone up for it. They put a little gravestone up. They didn't know what else to do, but they thought they would give it a proper send off. There was no the fear around it wasn't there.
So there's an alien grave out there somewhere, huh?
Well, there was. And then the government, it's funny, the government found out there was an investigation of it, and then they dug it up the day before the investigative team got permits from the township to dig it up themselves. It went missing. Go figure. Yeah.
Go figure.
U.S. government.
Now that we're talking about aliens, I'm gonna open up even a little bit more.
Yeah.
Project. So when you were talking about your experience on psychedelics and you got that download of the knowing, the yes, that's what we're measuring, and that's really what I'm more interested in. I don't actually ever talk about this much because where we are society wise, which is consciousness. It's consciousness. Consciousness is movement. And being able to measure consciousness gives us the ability to tip consciousness, right? Um, and that knowing that you're talking about is what we're measuring, is that we can help people come into that embodied knowing of that higher source of wisdom, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
You don't need our technology for it. You need a body.
Yeah,
and that's
this
and
technology.
That's it. And I was inspired by Patagonia's marketing when they were like, they had like a jacket and they were like, you don't need this jacket,
Yeah.
That's how they sold it. And like, there was a big environmental thing that how they were marketing it, but it's the same thing with our technology. It's like, you don't need our technology, but use it until you don't need it anymore. And what I'm trying to just get to is that when you have that sense of knowing that you have, it expands your sense of who you are. And then, on the other side of it, a hallmark of anxiety is being disconnected from that knowing, being disconnected from your feelings, which is your truth. Truth is a relative thing. There's like 8.8 billion different versions of truth walking around this earth. And so that's what I'm really interested in, is measuring consciousness. And there's a lot of other efforts going into it, like the quality of stuff and all that, but like it's movement. It's movement. I shouldn't say it's movement. It's moving. It's a verb, and it's moving. And so consciousness is all around us. It's in us, and it's always moving. And we can tap into it in ways that's what I want to. I need more confident with this and start talking about it more, because I'm interested to see how we can tap into it more.
Yeah.
For ourselves collectively.
Yeah. That's it. I mean, it's tapping into what is often termed in the spiritual community as the higher self, right? Because there's this personality, the Faust, Chicho, and this incarnation that I'm in right now, and I have my family, but at the same time, I have an identical twin brother. His name is Frank, and he lives in Pennsylvania. And at one point in time, not that long ago, we were one. We were one egg, and then we split in half, right? I mean, so was there always one soul, or was there one soul that divided? My intuition tells me that there was always, there was only one for a moment, and then there was always two. There's always two. We were always going in. The deal was to go in together, right? That's what my intuition tells me, that we've done this before, not necessarily as twins, but that we've always come down together, to live. So it's fascinating, and consciousness is like, you start to experience so much more of it when you realize that it is what is the animation of everything that's happening.
It's fundamental. Yeah, it's fundamental to everything.
It's so cool. Yeah, man. We could talk forever, guys. I'm
not sure I can talk forever, but
you, my friend, you guys are both fantastic. It's so fun, awesome to talk to you. We're gonna have to do it again, because this was a bit impromptu for my taste, but I didn't want to miss the opportunity to have you guys on. I hope everyone who's stuck with us this long enjoyed it. I'm sure there's a lot here, and we'll get a chance to go through it, and we'll definitely connect again. But I want to give you guys a chance to close, and I love doing that by offering you an opportunity to. I mean, I just think that there's so much wisdom in each and every person, and if you give them an opportunity to impart that, I want to, Mike, you go first. If you were leaving let's say that you were leaving on a UFO, and you had the opportunity to whisper into everyone's ear, everyone was going to go to sleep at the same time, just this once on Earth, and you could give them a program in a sentence or two. You could rewrite the program that would allow for a greater human civilization. What would you write? What would you tell them?
I think I would say, well, you're being breathed. You're being breathed, and the quality of our existence on this planet is in direct proportion to our awareness that we're being breathed. And the more we can relax into the breath and come into harmony with it, I think the more peace that we can find inside ourselves and find deeper connection between each other. And so inverting the idea that I'm breathing to the awareness of I'm being breathed, and there's a harmonious relationship of an in and out, like the tide goes in, the tide goes out, just like my breath does. And I can relax into that because it's an idea that I'm being taken care of. You know?
Okay. There it is. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm always taken care of. I have all that I need.
That I would say those two, that the last two sentences, I think that would be the most effective program. Yeah. That you're taken care of.
Yeah.
And that you have all that you need. I mean, that you could change the world with those two sentences right there. If you could get everyone to understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks,
Bill. Your turn.
That perfect complement to what I was going to say, because that is in fact the description of the experience when the nervous system is working. Breath is the most important motor function that we've got any conscious control over and conscious awareness of. So that is in fact what something like enlightenment is like, and that's what it's like when people are getting along. What I would do with my little UFO broadcast thing, though, is close to what I'd like to actually do with the rest of my life. And so for the last several years, I've stopped being super eager about monetizing stuff, and I've run around more like a Johnny Appleseed, just trying to give away these ideas and see who cares about them, which is why this is so much fun, because you guys do, and so it's wonderful to finally be among fellow travelers. But the thing that I want to do, in fact, and I would also do from this UFO, is to guide people toward exactly what to do to get to that state collectively. Because it's not enough to just be blissed out by yourself. As a species, we're going to need to be blissed out in groups. And the good news is that we evolved to be blissed out in groups of about a dozen, Paleo-kin group size. And so we could run a pretty good group ecstasy around the campfire for a few million years because we had nothing. That was TV, right? Is to just be ecstatic that you're with your family and you're all breathing around the fire and you have enough to eat. That's kind of what it's supposed to be like. But there's a lot of other things we can do now. We've got cool little tools like this. We've got grounding tools. We've got technology. We've got smartphone-y things we can use to measure. So now when I whisper to people to how to have these super parties, so think of it as like I'm the UFO party planner or something like that, I'll be whispering about how to touch, what to imagine, what to intend, what to recognize, what tools to use, and especially how to appreciate the subtle silences. Because basically the fewer words and the less noise and the less distractions, the higher the bandwidth of our connection. So as far as I know, the highest bandwidth connection that humans regularly have is in South India, in this meditation room called the Matra Mandir, which is basically a giant gold-covered ball which holds 80 humans at a time in perfect silence. And 15 minutes in their perfect silence, that not anyone's perfect silence, but that particular perfect silence is enough to last a week. So there are ways of group interaction, group meditation, which are even beyond paleo times. And the cool news out of math is if we evolve to be really happy in groups of a dozen, what happens if we have a group of 1,000?
Yeah.
It's an n-squared effect.
Yeah. It's like 100 monkey. Right. What do they call it? I forget.
39th monkey, something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
But at any rate,
Monkeys
it's
again,
like nuclear reactions. Once you understand that the reactions go up with like the square of the compactness, you realize there are ways of getting people and making us into some sort of a brilliantly resonant soup if everybody's on board and you know the tricks.
Yeah, that's what we definitely have that thread in common. Yeah, and you guys, I am so grateful for your time, and I really, I mean, I love these conversations. I really enjoyed this. It's not all. I don't often have two minds like yourself on to have some fun with like this. So this has been awesome, and we're going to do it again. And thank you guys so much for your time. I appreciate it.
All right, thanks very much. Nice meeting you, Faust. Nice seeing you again, Mike.
Likewise,
Take
Bill.
care.
Nice to meet you, Faust. Thank you so much.
You're welcome,
Okay,
guys. Take
bye-bye.
care. Have a great
You
day.
guys.